Every ancient culture taught good living by telling stories. Yes, the facts mattered, but the facts were better remembered when illustrated well. What's interesting is that those illustrations weren't remakes. They weren't the prodigal son in Rome, the Corinthian prodigal son, the Grecian prodigal daughter. The good stories were always new to illustrate truth. Jesus' parables illustrated truth, and each was unique. How do we tell stories of truth today? Are they intriguing, illustrative lessons? Or are they tired, repackaged stories where the scenes are changed to protect our laziness? Look at Jesus. His methods were new, relevant, contemporary, relevant, and true. Did I say relevant? Jesus taught godly living by telling stories. The facts mattered and they were remembered well because they were illustrated well, both in words and actions.
Offering information for your mind. Enabling transformation for your heart. Sabbath School U, a weekly dialogue exploring God's Word and its application for today's world.
I'm Andrew Campbell, and this is Sabbath School University. Welcome. So we have three guests that I'll get right to introducing. I'm going to invite you to give us your name, what you're studying, and then tell us something that you enjoy about being a student here at Andrews University.
Okay. So hi everyone, my name is Tam Nguyen, and I'm currently in the MBA program. This is my third semester here, even though I started a program in January, and I enjoy it so much, the snow and all of the good winds and the beach with my friends. But Andrew is really good place to be at because you hang out with the right group of people, sharing the same interests as well as everything else. So
cool.
Yeah.
And then could you also tell us where you're from as well?
Oh yes, I'm from Vietnam.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm Jean Mogusu. I am from Kenya, and I am here studying the MDiv program, the Master of Divinity.
Okay.
What do I love about Andrews? I've never experienced snow before, so being at Andrews gives me an opportunity to experience snow.
Very nice.
Hate cold, but I love snow.
Very nice.
My name is Fresnel Fanfan. I am from Brooklyn, New York, of Haitian descent.
Okay.
And one thing I like about Andrews is I love the diversity here. I love the spiritual atmosphere. I love how when you're walking, you could just see people praying together.
Yeah.
And the camaraderie that is here, and it represents heaven, the multiculturalness of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. And what are you studying?
Oh, well, I'm in the theological seminary right now.
Okay. MDiv?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask you, Jean, to pray. Now, I know there are a number of languages in Kenya. Can you pick one and tell us which one, and then pray in that language?
Okay, I'm going to pray in Kisi, which is my native tongue.
All right.
Okay, let's pray. Omaneno itultete kogote bingambia mono ase okotoari bagari oko sangre kanaiga ko some ebuku yao tutete kogo saba otwe omoiko mochenu bunabona tokare ko gambe eminto biebuku nande otwe okora kwao to nyare ko komanya inkyo tete gotote bi igoro ye bintu tokare kokwana rero seseni abantu bakare kotoigu rero nando to seseni tonyare komanya nande togwanche buno twanchete tosabire aseri taria Yesu Kristo omoseseni yoito. Amen.
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 Amen. And could you read the key text for us now, and then we'll get into the lesson?
Sure. Our key text comes from Matthew 13, verse 34 and 35, and it says, Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world.
Thank you very much. So you know that this quarter we're talking about discipleship. And for this particular lesson, we're talking about how metaphors play into the role of discipleship. Now, when you think of the Bible and you think of metaphors, I don't know about you, but for me, parables immediately come to my mind.
Yeah.
What is a parable to you? And I want you to define it personally.
Okay, so for me, a parable is more like a story.
Okay.
So I like watching movie a lot. So whenever I read about parables, I can imagine even the scene, what is happening there, and so I can involve myself into the story.
Okay.
And that's how I got, all of the lesson from it.
Oh, okay.
In my personal view.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, I guess for me, a parable would be a story that has a greater meaning behind it.
Okay.
So it's like I'm telling you a story, but behind the story, there's really another story that I want you to pay attention to.
Yeah.
That's how I would.
Well, for me, a parable is more an object lesson. An object lesson that incorporates a story that you can draw a principle from.
Okay.
That's what a
And when you
parable
say
is to me.
object lesson, what exactly do you mean?
Well, something that you could draw from nature, something that you could draw from whatever your living experience.
Okay.
That you could bring, draw a principle from the Bible from it, and you could learn from it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you were a businessman, then an object
Exactly.
lesson would be a story.
Something about business. If
Okay.
you're an engineer, something about that. Yeah.
Okay. And something that you can learn from and draw principles from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am reminded of, when I would go up for the children's story in church, and, they would tell a story, and then they would say, okay, so now the moral of the story.
Exactly.
And it's kind of, a story, but then it's also intended to teach a point.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of your favorite stories, and why do you like them? And this could be biblical, or this could be, I know, I would like to hear perhaps some non-biblical stories. What are some stories that you really like, and why?
Well, as for me, I can't exactly remember the word for word, but it's a story about an ant and a grasshopper.
Okay.
Or ants and grasshoppers. And while the ants were preparing for the wintertime, the grasshopper was, chilling, being lazy.
Okay.
And then once the wintertime came, the grasshopper wanted to get some of the food that the ants were preparing during the summertime.
Okay.
And from that, I learned not to be lazy, not to procrastinate, because, everything has to work in its proper time.
Yeah.
So that pretty much prepare for the future.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
That also reminds me of a pretty popular story, I think, in old culture, the turtle and the rabbit.
Oh,
They're
okay.
racing, the race. And, that's teach me a lot of lesson from that. Even when I grow up and I listen to it, I say, oh, I still got some out of it. First, you don't be lazy, don't be procrastinate like this story.
Exactly.
And third is like, don't be so full of yourself. Even though you are fast, you are the best, but don't be too full of yourself. Yeah, that's one of my favorite too.
Well, I remember a story. I'm trying to remember the details
Okay.
right now. But it was about I think it's an African tale. I remember it from this African book that we had growing up, of stories, and it was telling a story about a king who had a beautiful daughter, and they wanted to find someone to marry her. And all these guys would come and they would want to impress her with everything. But they decided that, or rather she decided that she would give them these tests, and after this test there was just one more test. So there remained two guys, and she brought them home, and the idea was she would cook and give them the food, and whoever ate the most would be the one she would choose. But they didn't know that. So there was this really handsome guy and this not so handsome guy. And the handsome guy was eating, and then at some point he stopped and looked at all the, his remains from the food, and he's like, no, I don't want her to see all this stuff that I'll look greedy. So he took all the food, all his remains, and put them on the not so cute guy.
And
then he lost out because he was not honest. So the moral of the story is you have to be honest at all times.
I see.
Yeah.
That's very nice. Now, Jesus used lots of parables, but parables weren't necessarily unique to Jesus, right? They were part of the culture that he utilized for discipleship. Now, what parables can you remember from the Old Testament?
There is one, I think it's called it's called something, the disappointed vineyard or something like that, in Isaiah 5.
Okay.
Isaiah 5, 1 to 6.
Okay.
And that one is more like, I remember correctly, the owner of the vineyard, he come and he grow these grapes, but then it becomes really, not so good of a fruit. And then he was like, what's the happen here? And the problem wasn't at him, but it was at the faith of him. That's why the fruit didn't come out as good as it should be. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good one to point out. I think that's one of the less well-known parables that's hidden in the Old Testament.
I think there's also the one, I know one of my favorite ones is the Nathan one.
Okay.
I was going to say that.
Hey, great minds think alike.
That's it. Frequency.
So, the story of Nathan goes to King David and tells him a story about this guy who had just one little sheep. And then the guy who had so much, but he came and stole him. And David, in his indignation, rises up and says, "Hey, whoever that is, I'm going to kill him," or whatever. Little did he know that he was talking about himself. And I think that's a really good Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great story. To add on to what you said, I like how Nathan the prophet, he had to use allegory to disguise the truth, because if he didn't, then because David was king, he could be punished for that. But he had to make it in a way that it was a storytelling, so that David could register it in his mind and be like, okay, and he could see it from an objective standpoint that's not his, that's not involving himself. And then so he was still able to relay the same truth to him, as opposed to just saying, hey, this is exactly what you need to do. And that would actually offend King David.
Yeah. I really like that parable, and it's particularly because if he had come to David, just straight up and said, hey, this is what you did wrong, immediately David's defenses would go
That's it.
up. And I think about that, and I think about myself, and I think, I can get very defensive too when I want to be stubborn and I want to think that I'm right, and or I justify what my decision was or whatever. And I think about that parable, and it actually caused David to be the one to sit in the seat of the judge, and to be the one to say, no, that man deserves to die. And then when Nathan turns the tables and then points out to him, actually, you're that man. And then David, he's already given his judgment, and he realizes exactly what he's done.
That's right.
Yeah. What methods exist today for us to teach truth? I mean, today we generally appeal to evidence and the facts, and we tend not to use stories quite as much, at least in Western popular culture. It's generally, what's the scientific research that will back your point? But sometimes stories kind of get lost, or maybe they're just used, in a small way to illustrate a small point, but you don't quite see it used in the way that perhaps ancient cultures or even other cultures still existing today use stories. In our context, do you think stories still have a role to play? What is relevant in our culture today?
Well, I believe that stories still have a role to play, no matter how, because we're in the age of technology, so no matter how, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, but if you really look at it, it's really stories, and when you really decipher everything and you really boil everything down, it comes down to a story. When you put up a tweet, you say, I did this, that's a story. Put up a Facebook status, that's a story. So stories still play an integral part, but they're just kind of disguised in a different way, to fit our context today.
I mean, something very simple would be like a cartoon. You know, I used to love Andy Cap, still do. You know, and sometimes it'll be like just saying something, or you know, something small, but it's like, whoa, where did that come from? And I think, you know, it's not that stories are lost.
Okay.
It's that we're probably using different methods to deliver the same thing. Because now it's like we live in a world that is very fast-paced. It's almost as if we've lost our patience for, you know, good stories.
Yeah.
So it's like you want to get to the punchline before you hear the whole story. That's why we have hashtags. You know, it's like hashtag. You know, you put one sentence on your Facebook status, but you have like 10 million hashtags. You know, and it's like, what was it? You know, might as well tell the whole story. You know, but that's kind of how we've gotten into telling our story in a way that is, you know, for the person today.
Do you think that stories have taken on a role that is, I guess, more primarily related to entertainment as opposed to more cognitive, intelligent conversation? Because when I think about it, I think, okay, you brought up movies. Movies essentially are story, you know, that is vividly illustrated. But I don't know. What has your experience been? I don't think that I find that people say, you know, I watched this movie and it really illustrated this point to me. It's changed my life, or you know, I really want to start doing this now because I learned this from. It seems like movies are primarily entertainment.
I got where you were driving there, because I still remember my dad. There's one time he's really want me to read Les Miserables. And I resist. I didn't want to read it. And he's like, oh, let's just watch it together. And watch it together is different from watch it myself, because if I watch it myself, I would not get some of the point from the movies out. But because I was watching with my dad, and he has some point that he wants to show me. So he started explaining to me. He's like, did you see this? Did you remember that? And that is actually, it's make the experience with the movies much better comparing to there are other people who go through that movie and be like, oh, there's a lot of, you know, lying there, people dying, hardship, but they don't see the, you know, other main points in the story, like forgiveness and things like that. So I think movie still has its role for delivering a message, but you need a mentor, you need a guidance throughout that as well.
Yeah, you know, you're bringing a very important point, because you can have a great story that has a great moral to it. But if someone is just taking that story primarily for entertainment, they may actually just miss the meaning that's behind it. So I think you're bringing out a very good point.
But I also wanted to say that unfortunately, and I don't know, I guess we're talking about movies, so I might as well keep with that theme. The idea that, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get to the point where I'm like, we're basically telling the same story in different ways, you know? So like even television shows or movies, it's like it's the same story. Boy meets girl, girl fall in love, yada 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 yada, happily ever after. So it's like there's no reality to it. You know, it's like the story never changes. It's just the same story told different ways, acted by different people. You know, and then they'll add a little this, a little that, you know, whatever. But it's basically the same story. And I think what I love about the Bible is that it's never the same story. You know, even though it sounds familiar, there's always something that you think that you kind of feel like you know where it's headed, and then pow, it just, you know, it's like no, you didn't. You know, so it's almost as if in life we are telling stories that are going the same place, but we thank God that we have the Bible, which is never the same. I can read the same story, but every time it'll hit me a different way.
That's right.
You know?
I agree with you. when
You do?
Yeah, I do actually. No, because when you look at the television and you see the sitcoms from the 70s and you see the sitcoms now, they're pretty much like a reenactment of the old ones, except with a new story, with a new twist and everything like that.
New cast.
New cast, new faces and everything. So pretty much at the end of the day, although, you know, I appreciate the entertainment, but sometimes the moral and the severity of the lesson can be lost in the entertainment.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, you know, I think of my grandfather, like he loved to tell stories. I resort back to, you know, just a simple person, you know, just telling me a story. And I appreciate it. I use my own imagination for my own entertainment. You know, you don't need to give it all to me. you know. So I really appreciate that.
Now, I think we can make a very good point from what you're bringing out here. You notice you brought up sitcoms from the 70s or whatever. There are people today who love watching sitcoms or movies from the 70s, 60s, whatever, you know, old movies. But there's some people that if it's not made in the 2000s, you know, they don't really want to watch it because it's not new. And I'm thinking right now about the way that we package, say, the gospel. And sometimes we get caught up in using the same stuff that's been around since the 70s. Not that it was bad, not that it doesn't work today still, you know, because there's still people who 70s material will appeal to today. But there's some people who they need it to be repackaged. And so in the entertainment industry, obviously they've noticed that you need to keep up with the times. You need to constantly be producing new stuff. You said it's the same story, it's the same stuff, but with different twists and so forth. Why can't we do that? You know, why can't we keep up with the times and keep our message relevant? It's the same message, but it's meeting people where they are and relating to them in a way that they can understand.
I think a good example of that is like a while back, I want to say maybe the 50s or 60s, the only mode of watching a show would be on the television screen at a specific time.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're not at home sitting down at, let's say, 8 o'clock, you missed it, you know? Now it's like, if I miss it, I can watch it on the internet, I can TiVo it, I can, you know, you have lots of, you can watch it on your phone, you can watch it on your iPad. The media, whatever, entertainment industry is recognizing that people's lives are not stagnant. And so in order for them to reach their audience, they have to meet people where they are. People's lives are fast, so you have to give them other options that, you know, that kind of move with their lives. I think we should do the same thing for the gospel. And for those who may say that we don't want to dumb down the gospel, well, Jesus basically dumbed down the gospel sometimes. Parables. He had to be like, okay, these people are not going to understand if I just tell them, hey, you're a sinner, or you are too wrapped up in your riches for you to get to heaven. You need to let it go. Instead, he'll tell him, you know, why don't you perhaps, you know, here's a story of such and such and such. Why don't you do this or do that? Or he gave parables so that the people would have something else to ponder about. You know, it's almost as if like a child. When a child is crawling, and you know, when they're just learning, they'll be happy with where they are. But once they've been crawling for a while, they'll be all over the place. They want to, you know, you have to kind of fence them in. And because they want to go all over the place. So it's kind of like that. With parables, you want to drive the story. And let the person experience what you want them, you know, the power of the message.
Definitely.
When I think about parables, you know, I think immediately Matthew chapter 13, because that's one of the, it's basically a chapter that's filled with, you know, a lot of parables. And of course you have one of the very famous ones, the parable of the soils. And so you have the sower going out to sow, and he sows his seeds, and some of them fall on good ground, some of them fall on tough ground on the wayside, some are in thorns, and so Jesus uses this story to illustrate the way that the gospel goes out and is received by some, and it sprouts up very quickly, but then it dies. Some of it gets choked out by the cares of the world, but for some it falls on the good ground, and it springs up and it yields a bountiful harvest. And Jesus uses this story to illustrate a powerful point about the gospel. But the thing is that this is a story that was very, very relevant to the people he was speaking to. Because, I mean, for us now, a sower going out to sow, that's nice, but I don't know how many people today in, urban setting really resonate with that illustration.
Related to it.
Yeah. But as soon as you start talking about electronics or your Android or iPhone or whatever, then the people that have this kind of stuff, they can immediately connect and they know exactly what you're talking about. And so if we could find a way to tell this story in a way that people will resonate with, and it's not just in a way that says, oh, that's cute. It's more like, I connect. I know exactly what you're saying, and I feel that connection right away.
Right.
I think that's something that is worth our time and effort.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always so much going around us. I mean, that it's sometimes we're tempted to be like, God, where are you? Why can't you just, do something?
Yeah.
It's almost as if God seems silent when everything else around the world it seems to be just going horribly wrong. You have, people, mass killings, all these terrible things, terrorist attacks, and you're kind of like, okay, what's going on? If you're a God that's merciful and all of that, then why can't you do something about it? For me, something like the parable of the weeds, where he says, let all of them, let them all grow together.
Yeah.
The wheat and the tares.
The wheat and the tares.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like, as much as we want those people, let's say bad people, to be shot and killed and let them die for once instead of the innocent people dying, they need salvation just as much as we do.
Yeah.
If you'd like to join us in our discussion, please visit our Facebook page off the link on our website at www.sabbathschoolu.org. That's www.sabbathschool.org. For Sabbath School University, I'm Andrew Campbell, and we'll see you next week.